because a country in a state of emergency or engaged in what President Bush called a war on terror might very well decide that the most effective way of gaining valuable information from suspected terrorists is by torturing them, let us say using the notorious waterboarding techniques practiced under the Bush administration. Now, there may be very, very plausible reasons for this in terms of national security, and it's certainly in the interest of all its citizens that they should be safe from attacks. But if there are human rights in place, all these reasons are to no avail in justifying torture. Human rights, by their very nature, override all such utilitarian reasons, all such reasons given on behalf of the general good of the majority. They are political trumps on behalf of the individual. And we had a good example of an exchange which brought this out not long ago, where Tony Blair wrote in the paper or in a speech, said, the demands of the majority of the law-abiding community have to take precedence. He wanted to rebalance the relationship, he said, between the rights of suspected terrorists and what he called the right of the community for security. But this idea that balancing human rights against the general good is a kind of cost-benefit matter is a deeply misleading metaphor. Cost-benefit analysis is an important form of reasoning for most public policy issues, but not in the case of human rights. As Ronald Dworkin wrote about that particular speech of Tony Blair, this amazing statement, he called it, undermines the whole point of recognizing human rights. It is tantamount to saying that there is no such thing. Human rights stand up against even against the most plausible justification in terms of the common good. Now, can we go further than what I've suggested further in terms of moral insight and giving reasons for this? Because what I've suggested is that straightforward utilitarianism or consequentialism is overridden by a view that believes in human rights. But there is another form of utilitarianism called rule utilitarianism or rule consequentialism. This considers not the consequences of doing or not doing something, but the consequences of having or not having certain rules. Let us say we have a rule against stealing. Now, what we might argue is that it is absolutely essential for societies to have rules like rules against stealing and rules against murder. And their justification is the consequences for a society if they did not have those rules. It's not about the consequences of doing or not doing some particular act, what's called act utilitarian, but the consequences or not consequences of having certain rules. And it seems to me you could justify human rights on the basis of a rule utilitarianism, because you could look at a country like Germany under Hitler or Stalin, Russia under Stalin, and you could say that the propensity to justify what is wrong by putting forward utilitarian reasons is so pronounced that it is absolutely essential that we have certain basic safeguards in place, such as the safeguard against torture or safeguard against unjust imprisonment. So you could justify human rights along those lines, because you could say that, all right, we're only waterboarding in order to get some information from those people. But where does it stop? You could go beyond that and inflict even further forms or worse forms of cruelty. And you could do it on more and more people. Unless you have some kind of absolute benchmark with this kind of rule, you never know where it's going to end up. No doubt Hitler justified what he was doing and Stalin justified what he was doing because they thought that it was in terms of the common good, in terms of what would be best for their societies. That's the way we normally think as human beings. However, to revert to where I began, really, I don't think that this rule-based utilitarianism, however useful it might be in terms of trying to get people to take human rights seriously, doesn't get to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is the capacity, is the moral insight, the recognition about the unique worth and dignity of human beings. And we might want to say, faced with, say, waterboarding, that our society is based on certain values, one of which, the most important of which, is the dignity and worth of every single individual. And we might say that our moral vision of society is one in which people should not be tortured under any circumstances at all. And I want my society to be characterized by that kind of value, that kind of vision, whatever the consequences. That, we might say, is what I stand for. That is what we stand for. And this is what makes our society different from one which advocates terrorism, or one which advocates degrees of torture in opposing terrorists. I'm not going to let them win a victory by making me act in a similar way, we might say.